To ambush their target, 4 Curtiss P-40 Warhawks dove 10,000 feet over the coast of New Guinea. Their objective was a silver-gray Aichi D-3 Type 99 Val dive bomber. First Lieutenant Donald S. Lee, Jr., the flight leader, lined up the Japanese aircraft in his gun sight and unleashed a burst of .50 caliber rounds. Just then, he heard and felt a heavy thump. His aircraft had been hit in the radiator by a 7.7 millimeter round fired by the Val's rear gunner. Lee banked away and saw with dread that the temperature gauge on his engine was climbing. His wingman later said he saw a thin trail of white mist escaping the damaged Warhawk, signaling that coolant was leaking fast. Lee knew he wouldn't be flying this plane home. At just 23 years old, Lee quickly considered his slim chances of surviving the dangerous waters off Cape Ward Hunt. Even if he managed to bail out successfully, hostile patrol boats and man-eating sharks awaited him, and there was no guarantee that friendly rescue vessels would arrive in time. As he unbuckled his safety strap and stepped onto the wing, he tried to push those thoughts aside. But before he could jump, the plane rolled suddenly and slammed him against the rudder. Only 800 feet above the ocean, he began to plummet. This incident on July 14, 1943, was just a footnote in the long and storied history of the 49th Fighter Group of the United States Army Air Forces. Known as the Fighting 49ers, they had been rushed into action to protect Australia and New Guinea. Their opponents were seasoned Japanese pilots flying highly advanced, nimble, and deadly warplanes in an incredibly harsh environment. Over 3 years of battle, the 49th Fighter Group claimed 668 enemy aircraft shot down. Among the group's distinguished members were Colonel Gerald R. Johnson, who scored all 22 of his kills with the 49ers, and Major Richard I. Bong, America's ace of aces with 40 victories, 21 of which came during his time with the squadron. But beyond the famous names were dozens of other brave airmen who risked their lives daily, flying dangerous missions over enemy terrain in aging aircraft. One of them was Lieutenant Donald Lee, who served for 18 grueling months with the 49th Fighter Group before he was forced to ditch his plane off the northern coast of New Guinea. Lee logged 600 combat hours in the P-40 Warhawk, an aircraft that had been in service since the early days of the Pacific War, when American rookies clashed with battle-hardened Japanese Zero pilots near Darwin, Australia. Throughout his service, Lee intercepted enemy bombers like the Mitsubishi G-4M Betty, strafed enemy ground forces, and escorted countless Allied transport planes. He scored 4 confirmed aerial victories during that time. His story is one of courage, determination, and a mix of fortune both good and bad. Donald Harwood Lee Jr. was born on June 29, 1920 in Ypsilanti, Michigan, to Donald and Hazel Estelle Lee. He graduated from Ypsilanti High School in 1938 and studied architecture at the University of Michigan for 2 years. But soon, his path would change dramatically. Like many young men of his time, Lee dreamed of flying. At that time, the Aviation Cadet Training Program offered a 7-month course to qualified candidates who had completed 2 years of college and met demanding physical standards. Those who succeeded would be commissioned as second lieutenants in what was then the Army Air Corps, soon renamed the Army Air Forces in June 1941, and earn their pilot wings. Lee was bright and athletic, and with few opportunities in his hometown, he saw aviation as a chance to serve and build a future. He enlisted in the U.S. Army on April 28, 1941, in Detroit, Michigan. He received advanced flight training at Ellington Field near Houston, Texas, flying the North American AT-6A Texan, a 2-seat trainer. Under the close watch of USAAF instructors, he refined his skills in night flying, navigation, and formation tactics. On October 28th, during a rough landing, Lee ground-looped an AT-6A. His plane dug a wing into the grass and spun around. Despite the mishap, he still earned his wings. Just 4 days after the United States declared war on Japan, On December 12, 1941, Second Lieutenant Donald Lee graduated from flight school and received his commission. However, he barely had time to celebrate. He was ordered to report to Morrison Field near West Palm Beach, Florida, to join the 49th Pursuit Group. He arrived there on December 21st and was assigned to the 7th Pursuit Squadron, one of the 3 units in the group, alongside the 8th and 9th Squadrons. Rumors soon began swirling that the unit would be sent overseas, and those rumors were quickly confirmed. On December 26th, the 49ers received deployment orders. The sudden activity must have left Lee and his fellow airmen feeling overwhelmed. The squadron quickly packed up their personal and operational gear and boarded a troop train leaving West Palm Beach just before midnight on January 4, 1942. They arrived in San Francisco 4 days later and were temporarily housed in the Cow Palace, a former cattle exhibition hall. More than 500 support personnel, including mechanics, clerks, electricians, cooks, and others, joined the 49th to prepare for the journey ahead. On January 12, 1942, the airmen began boarding the SS Mariposa, a former luxury liner repurposed for troop transport. The ship's destination remained classified until it passed under the Golden Gate Bridge later that day. Then the secret was revealed. They were bound for Australia. The 49th was the first American pursuit unit to go overseas after Pearl Harbor. But the way it deployed showed how unprepared the country was for war. No one even knew what type of aircraft the unit would be flying in Australia. Out of 102 pilots, 95, including Don Lee, had never flown a fighter before. After nearly 3 weeks at sea, the ship Mariposa arrived in Melbourne, Australia on February 1st, and Lee disembarked the next day. Within a week, the 7th Pursuit Squadron settled at a training base in Bankstown, New South Wales. Their main focus there was learning to fly their new planes, the P-40 Warhawk, a recently produced fighter aircraft. At the beginning of World War II, the P-40 Warhawk was the most readily available and capable American fighter. It had a single seat, a low-wing design, and a powerful 1,150 horsepower inline engine that could reach speeds over 360 miles per hour. It was armed with 6 .50 caliber machine guns and could carry either a drop tank or a 500-pound bomb. Many training accidents occurred during this phase. Some novice pilots lost control during takeoff because of the engine's torque. The P-40's narrow landing gear often caused ground loops, and its engine was prone to overheating. This was similar to what had happened to Lee back in Texas. The 49th experienced over 60 accidents during training, many of them fatal. As Lee and his squadron began to get used to the aircraft that would take them into combat, the enemy was moving closer to Australia. By February 1942, Japanese forces had taken control of the skies over the Philippines. Their next target was the Netherlands East Indies. On the island of Java, Japanese Zeros flown by skilled pilots outnumbered the combined forces of Dutch, British, and American aircraft. Papua New Guinea, part of a large landmass just north of Australia, became the final natural barrier to a Japanese invasion. Before an amphibious assault could be launched, Japanese bombers attacked Port Moresby, the capital of Papua, and then on February 19th launched 2 major airstrikes on Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory. American interceptors and Australian gunners offered little resistance as 242 Japanese aircraft bombed ports and airfields, causing serious damage. Whether ready or not, the 49th was needed to help stop Japan's next move. On March 4th, the 7th Pursuit Squadron flew 12 aircraft north from Bankstown to Horn Island, Queensland. Lee was one of the pilots who took off at dawn on March 7th. His P-40, serial number 41-5313, was heavily damaged when he reached the Charters Towers airfield. After repairs, Lee flew the plane, now named Bitsahawk, to Darwin in late March. By this time, key personnel had already started evacuating from the Netherlands East Indies and the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur, determined but exhausted, arrived in Australia on March the 17th to build up defenses and plan for a future return to the Philippines. That same day, experienced pilots from the 17th Pursuit Squadron, who had escaped Java, joined the 49th. Among them was Captain Boyd D. Buzz Wagner, the first American ace of World War II, who became deputy group leader. Lieutenant William Heng, another pilot from Java with 5 aerial victories, painted an image of a mythical aboriginal creature called the bunyip on his Warhawk's tail. This image became the symbol of the squadron, which was renamed the 7th Fighter Squadron on May 15th. In April, the 7th Fighter Squadron assembled at Bachelor Field near Darwin to help protect the area. Although Lee flew regular patrols, he hadn't yet encountered the G4M Betty bombers and a 6M0 escorts that often raided Australia. That changed on July 30th. In response to Coast Watchers' alerts, 46 American P-40s scrambled to defend Port Darwin. Lee flew alongside Lieutenant Ray Malikian at 25,000 feet. They saw 9 Betty bombers flying directly toward them. Lee followed Malikian into a head-on attack, and the enemy opened fire. 1 P-40 was shot down, and Japanese Zero fighters scattered the American planes. Second Lieutenant Gene Drake had to abandon his aircraft off Waggate Beach. 1 enemy bomber was probably hit, but Lee didn't score in this 90-second encounter. 3 weeks later, he would get another chance. On August 23rd, the Japanese launched what would be their last attack on Darwin. They sent 27 Betty bombers escorted by 15 Zeros. The 7th FS was ready. Lee and Malikian flew again, charging through the bomber formation to attack enemy fighters. After losing contact with the rest of his flight, Lee regained altitude and began heading home. Along the way, he spotted a lone Zero and attacked it. General MacArthur's headquarters later described the August 26th interception as a brilliant tactical success. That day, the 7th FS claimed to have downed 7 Japanese aircraft at the cost of 1 P-40. Lee and his fellow Screaming Demons had evolved into a highly skilled and deadly air combat unit. But as the conflict around Darwin began to calm down, their abilities were required elsewhere. The squadron took on the critical role of leading aerial counterattacks in New Guinea and became part of General George C. Kenney's 5th Air Force. On September 14th, the 7th Fighter Squadron undertook a challenging journey of over 1,100 miles across the Ramu River and dense jungle to reach a base called 14 Mile, named for its distance from Port Moresby by road. General Kenney later reflected on the harsh living conditions there: mosquitoes, suffocating clouds of dust, oppressive heat, swarms of flies that made eating a struggle, and no real comfort in sight. At this rough outpost, Lee gave up his aging but dependable Curtiss P-40 Warhawk for a newer P-40E, serial number 41-25553, which he nicknamed Pissed Off. The name may have reflected his growing frustration with both the environment and the nature of their missions. Around this time, Australian ground forces managed to halt a Japanese assault on Port Moresby and began advancing steadily along the rugged Kokoda Track toward enemy positions on New Guinea's northern coast. Lee and his squadron supported this effort through constant ground attack missions. These were essential but underappreciated duties. With heavy 500-pound bombs slung beneath their aircraft, they had limited ability to engage enemy fighters in aerial combat, despite their eagerness to do so. By October 16th, Lee had been promoted to first lieutenant. That same month, their airfield received brand-new P-40K aircraft, a much-desired upgrade boasting 150 more horsepower than the E models. Though Lee had to wait several months before getting his hands on one, he was eager for the improved performance it offered. Soon after, the 7th Fighter Squadron began flying escort missions for bomber groups attacking Japanese fortifications along the northern coast. On November 30th, over Buna, a large formation of Japanese A6M0 fighters tried to intercept an American strike. Lee, now a flight element leader, was in green flight. He spotted enemy aircraft diving toward them through clouds. He described the engagement later, saying that as their formation reached 7,000 feet, they were attacked from behind by two Zeros. Lee followed his lead pilot into a dive, latched onto another Zero's tail, and fired. The enemy pilot tried to evade by climbing into a stall turn, but Lee caught him in a burst of gunfire, igniting his plane and sending it spiraling down in flames. That marked another confirmed kill. As 1943 began, the Japanese Army Air Force started flying over New Guinea, introducing their nimble Nakajima P-43 Oscars into the skies. These aircraft were often confused with the more familiar Navy Zeros, but proved just as dangerous. Lee's squadron was soon relocated to a newly constructed airfield near Dobodura, close to Buna. Though the base was muddy and crawling with scorpions, it offered rare comforts, such as regular mail, nightly movies, a baseball field, and warm American-style meals. However, their Christmas packages didn't arrive until May. That spring, Lee finally received his new P-40 Warhawk, serial number 4245979, which he once again christened Pissed Off. On March 5th, while escorting RAF Bristol bow fighters on a strafing mission over a Japanese airfield at Malahang, northeast of Leh, Lee got the chance to put his new plane to the test. He, along with Second Lieutenant Dave Baker and Captain Ray Malikian, engaged two P-43 Oscars attempting to escape into cloud cover. Another Oscar flew across Lee's path, and he pursued it into the sky, firing as he closed in. The enemy fighter exploded into flames at the wing roots, breaking apart mid-air. This was Lee's third confirmed kill of a Ki-43. As summer neared and the squadron completed its move to Dobodura, they took on an intense schedule of missions including transport, bomber escort, and ground attacks. The dangers Lee faced weren't limited to aerial combat. On May 10th, while attempting to deliver repair parts to a radar station near Oro Bay, he crashed an Australian-built Tiger Moth trainer, known to American pilots as the PT-24, after hitting oil drums hidden at the edge of the runway. Thankfully, neither he nor his passenger were hurt. Later that summer, Lee, now leading Orange Flight, launched a mission on July 14th to escort C-47 transport planes to the Mubo camp near Salamaua. While flying high cover at 21,000 feet, their group encountered two Japanese Valdive bombers flying just offshore. Led by Malikian, the U.S. fighters dove in, attacking the enemy planes. Lee managed to get behind one of the bombers and opened fire, setting it ablaze. However, the Val's gunner managed to hit Lee's aircraft, damaging its coolant system. As his Warhawk began to fail, Lee radioed for help and tried to reach Lasanga Island, an Allied-held territory just off New Guinea's coast. He bailed out at 800 feet. While exiting the aircraft, he struck the tail and broke his left arm but still managed to deploy his parachute. Once in the water, Lee found himself in serious trouble. His life vest and inflatable raft both failed, making it nearly impossible for him to stay afloat. His squadron mates attempted to toss him emergency rafts, while Malikian coordinated a rescue from above. Lucius Lacroix, one of his wingmen, tried strafing sharks that were beginning to gather around Lee. Low on fuel, the squadron had to turn back, but two A-20 Havoc bombers arrived in time to drop a large life raft. About 30 minutes later, the crew of the PT-50, a patrol torpedo boat, pulled him from the water. After returning to Dobodura for medical treatment, Lee was promoted to captain and sent to group headquarters. He was awarded the Purple Heart during a ceremony on August 25th. Once his tour ended, he returned to the United States for a rest and attended command school. In September 1944, now a major, he went back to the Southwest Pacific and assumed command of the 67th Fighter Squadron, known as the Fighting Cocks, part of the 13th Air Force stationed in the Philippines. Despite flying many combat missions with the 67th, Lee never added to his total of aerial victories. With 4 confirmed kills, he fell just 1 short of becoming an ace. Don Lee continued to serve his country as a reserve officer in the Air Force and flew North American F-86 Sabre jets during the Korean War. His list of military honors included the Bronze Star with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. He eventually retired with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. In his civilian life, Lee worked in the insurance industry, raised 5 children, and welcomed 13 grandchildren. Donald H. Lee, Jr. passed away on February 20, 2011 in Edmond, Oklahoma, at the age of 90. He never became a household name, and his face is absent from aviation halls of fame. Ironically, more people remember the nickname of his plane, Pissed Off, than the determined young pilot who flew it with bravery across the Pacific. But Don Lee was among the few American airmen who saw the full arc of the Pacific Air War, from the desperate early battles over Darwin to the eventual victory against Japan. His legacy is one of courage, endurance, and quiet heroism.